Hello and welcome to another Prestige Market Movements update. I'm Stuart Reed, Head of Marketing here, and we are, as always, joined by Nicole, our Head of Procurement. How are you, Nicole? What's going on?
I'm good. I'm good. First day back today from holiday.
Very nice, Adelaide.
I was in the Lake District. So thankfully, it was not as hot as it was down here. It was kind of late 20s. So took the dog swimming. It was lovely.
Oh, nice. Yeah, lots of nice cold water around there, so you're all in that there. Perfect. Good stuff. All right, so we've got a bit of a sort of mix match we're going to do today, haven't we? We've got a little bit of an update, sort of market wise, and then we're going to go into something that's a bit of a look forward, I think. So, what's going on at the moment? Tell us what's happening.
Absolutely. So, I have some Brexit news. I know it's been a long time since we've had to keep up to date with all the twists and turns of that. Last month, the government in the UK announced a new SPS agreement with the EU. So, SPS stands for Sanitary and Phytosanitary, and it's a set of rules essentially governing food safety, animal health, and plant standards. So this new agreement, it should hopefully significantly reduce trade friction on food imports. In practical terms, it removes any border checks, certificates, and post Brexit paperwork, hopefully making it cheaper and faster to move products like fresh meat, dairy, and produce. Now, over time, this increased efficiency and renewed competition from EU suppliers should help ease pressure on UK food prices. However, the agreement isn't expected to come into force until mid next year. So, overall, it's a long term structural shift that should stabilise food inflation rather than deliver a sharp drop in prices next year. So, some good news.
That is some good news. It's about time we had a little bit of that for sure. Anything else going on in the markets? Obviously, we've got the whole Iran thing. I assume that's still affecting what's happening there.
Yeah, I mean, the Middle East remains a key market focus, but sentiment shifted noticeably in recent weeks if you've been keeping up to date with the news. So, the earlier concerns centered on disruption to oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz. With the strait now reopening, how long for, not sure, but tanker movements are now increasing. Oil prices have fallen back significantly from their recent highs and approaching pre conflict levels. So, for food markets, fuel remains a really critical cost driver, influencing transport, farming machinery, fertilizer, and also packaging costs as well. But the recent easing in oil prices should help reduce some inflationary pressure across the supply chain. So, although energy markets remain vulnerable to geopolitical developments and shipping costs are still elevated, I think the key message is that while the immediate risk of a major energy driven inflation shock is reduced, markets will continue to monitor the durability of the current agreement and the pace at which normal oil flows resume.
Okay, good. Well, thank you for that. So we thought we'd do something a bit different this time, and so we thought we'd look at a little macro factor that it's likely to hit. We think at this time, and that's the risk of a super El Nino. So we know it affects food markets, but Nicole, do you want to start by sort of giving us a baseline and what turns a regular El Nino into a super El Nino?
Yeah, absolutely. So, El Nino is a natural climate event which parts of the Pacific Ocean become unusually warm. So, that warming might seem far away, but it disrupts weather patterns across the whole globe. A super El Nino is essentially a more extreme version of this, hence the word super, where sea surface temperatures rise significantly above average. And we're talking by more than 2 degrees. And that's when we start to see really pronounced impacts like extreme heat. We were just talking about that earlier, drought and flooding in different parts of the world.
Okay. So definitely more of a global thing rather than localized. I imagine it's going to impact sort of the systems that agriculture relies on then.
Yeah, exactly. It reshapes global weather patterns, and that's critical because agriculture depends heavily on predictable weather. For example, some regions like Southeast Asia or even parts of Africa, they often experience drought during El Nino, while others may see excessive rainfall and flooding. So you end up with these extremes happening at the same time across real key food producing regions, which creates a lot of instability.
Yeah, no, instability, I assume, will then transfer into food and beverage supply chain across the globe, really.
Yeah. So the biggest impact is on crop yields. So extreme heat and drought can damage harvest quite quickly. Once temperature starts pushing above around 30 degrees, crop productivity falls and livestock really also struggle with heat stress. And it's not just the weather itself. So El Nino can also disrupt things like fertilizer supply and planting cycles. So if farmers miss the key windows that affect production months down the line, so the overall effect is lower yields and more uncertainty in supply.
Yeah, so with these yields suppressed and plantings delayed, etc., obviously that's going to affect pricing. What exactly should procurement teams be looking out for, both in sort of individual pricing lines, but also on a commodity level? What should they be aware of?
So, I mean, put simply, less supply and more disruption tends to mean higher prices. When harvests are reduced or inconsistent and supply chains are under real pressure, costs just increase. So that feeds through into food inflation. We're also seeing that certain commodities are particularly exposed. So we're talking rice, sugar, vegetable oils, coffee, and products that rely really heavily on stable tropical climates. So, when those regions are hit by drought or flooding, global markets just feel it really quickly.
Yeah, so it's a global market thing. Obviously, there's lots of import and export across the globe. Is it going to affect every country equally, or are we just looking at localized around the areas where they're most severely hit?
So, that's a really important point because no, in wealthier countries, the impact typically shows us as kind of higher prices on shelves, and that's what we see in the supermarkets. But in more vulnerable regions, it can be pretty much more severe. So, with rising food insecurity and extreme cases, famine risk. So, that's because many countries are already dealing with fragile food systems, and it is high import dependency or economic pressure. So, when a shock like an El Nino hits, it can just tip things over the edge.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's pretty sobering conversations we had. Question that we haven't discussed, so I'm just going to throw it out there and see how you cope with it. But when do we think these sort of pricing impacts are likely to hit?
So we're already having some conversations with our suppliers. Obviously, the weather being quite warm at the moment, everybody's talking about climate change and global warming. What's happening? We've seen it in TV shows that we're watching. Not to name names, but if you've been watching um, a particular character on a streaming service that I won't name. He talks about his farm and how every single season that he's done so far, I think it's five, it's been the driest June, it's been the driest July. These aren't everything that we've spoken about today is not new. It's just going to be a continuation of the conversations that we're having at the moment, just a bit more severe. I think couple that with the conflict in the Middle East as well. I've said fertilizer about 3 times during this podcast. You couple that with an already disruptive supply chain, this is just going to compound the issue. We're lucky we have very great relationships with our suppliers so that we can be very forward thinking. We would invite our clients to open conversations about products they want to put on their menu as far ahead as they can, so that we can then look to the suppliers, have those conversations to say, are these are the products we're thinking of putting on the menu? What's your market research telling you, and here's what our market research is telling us. I think being agile is just something that we've had to do and we've spoken about over the last 12 months. We need to do more of it, essentially, and hope that it rains sometime soon, but not too much because then it will flood.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and we talked about it at the start of the podcast, but 3 record-breaking days of heat in June in a row.
Yeah.
It's clearly already hitting, isn't it? Well, thank you, Nicole. Really, really educational stuff. Really useful. So thank you for that. And as always, if anyone has any issues at all, if you find yourself struggling with any of these issues we've touched on today, or want to find out more, do visit our website, prestige-purchasing.com. and we will see you next time. Thanks, Nicole.
Thanks, Stu.